David Mloud's life is defined by stark opposites, balancing celebrated achievements in Hollywood with a disturbing history of predatory misconduct. Sources vary, but it is stated that David was born either in 1944 or 1945 into a family with significant ties to the entertainment industry. He was the cousin of Warren Beatty and Shirley MacLaine, two of Hollywood's most celebrated actors, and his own career would eventually intersect with theirs in both professional and personal ways. Peers shared that David was deeply ambitious early in his professional life. By the 1980s, he had established himself as a producer and associate producer on several major films. Among his most notable credits were The Pickup Artist in 1987, starring Robert Downey Jr., and Reds in 1981, a film for which Warren Beatty won the Academy Award for Best Director. He was also involved in the production of Ishtar from 1987, a much publicized film that, despite its commercial failure, further cemented David's reputation as a Hollywood insider. These successes placed him in the circle of some of the industry's most influential figures and gave him access to resources and networks that would later complicate efforts to bring him to justice. David's first known run-in with the law occurred in 1986, when he was arrested in Times Square, New York. The charges were grave. He was convicted of sodomizing 3 runaway boys. Despite the seriousness of the offense, he was sentenced to only 2 years of probation, a remarkably lenient outcome that may have emboldened him to continue his predatory activities. This conviction did not result in significant public scrutiny at the time, and David was able to maintain his Hollywood career for several more years. By the late 1980s, David's criminal behavior had escalated both in scope and boldness. According to law enforcement records and contemporaneous news accounts, he began systematically targeting vulnerable boys, often between the ages of 12 and 16, in the Bronx and Brooklyn neighborhoods of New York City. His MO was both manipulative and predatory. David would frequent housing projects and areas known for youth homelessness, flashing large sums of cash and promising the boys new clothes, sneakers, and other material incentives if they agreed to accompany him. Once he had gained their trust, he would lure them to hotel rooms in New Jersey, where he paid them between $30 and $40 to watch or participate in sexual acts. Investigators eventually determined that David had transported at least 15 boys from New York to New Jersey for the purpose of exploitation. The FBI and the New York City Police Department launched a 3-month investigation, culminating in David's arrest in Brooklyn in December 1989. At the time of his arrest, he was reportedly about to pick up more children in his rented car. This moment also revealed that David intended to transport his victims across state lines for illegal purposes. After the arrest on December 14, 1989, David appeared at the Bronx Criminal Court for a hearing related to his 34 charges. His lawyer informed him that detectives from Queens were present to arrest him on additional, unrelated solicitation charges. Recognizing the gravity of his situation, David fled the courthouse before the hearing began, evading a $6,000 bail order. His escape triggered an immediate warrant and launched a multi-agency manhunt spanning the FBI, NYPD, and later Interpol. By 1993, a federal grand jury indicted David in absentia on 6 counts of interstate transportation of minors for prostitution, a felony carrying a maximum 10-year prison sentence per charge. The indictment alleged he had continued exploiting minors while evading capture, potentially across multiple states. The FBI's involvement highlighted the case's national significance, with agents pursuing leads in Canada and Europe. In 1994, Interpol issued a red notice, formally classifying David as a fugitive wanted for international trafficking. In the early 1990s, David's whereabouts were a matter of speculation. Investigators suspected that, given his resources and contacts, he could have fled not only New York, but the United States altogether. He was known to have connections in Canada, particularly in Toronto and British Columbia, as well as possible links in Europe. These suspicions were reinforced by the fact that David had a prior criminal record in Canada, specifically in Toronto, where he had been charged with crimes involving minors. His fingerprints were already on file with the RCMP, a fact that would later prove crucial down the line. During this period, law enforcement agencies issued bulletins and alerts, and David's case was listed among the most wanted fugitives sought by the FBI and New York City police. As the years passed, David's ability to remain hidden suggested a sophisticated approach to life on the run. He was thought to have lived under assumed names, which allowed him to move with relative anonymity and avoid detection in new communities. The use of aliases is a common tactic among fugitives, but David's background in Hollywood, where reinvention and secrecy are professional assets, likely gave him an edge in maintaining a low profile. Law enforcement agencies in both the United States and Canada work to track financial transactions, monitor known associates, and follow up on reported sightings. However, David's trail often went cold. He was adept at blending in, and the lack of digital surveillance technology in the early 1990s made it easier for someone with means to disappear. There were unconfirmed sightings in various Canadian cities and rumors that he may have traveled to Europe, but none of these leads resulted in his capture. The final chapter unfolded in Montreal, Quebec, though the exact timeline of David's arrival here and activities remains unclear. By the late 1990s, Montreal was a cosmopolitan city with a transient population, making it an ideal place for someone seeking to avoid attention. It is unknown how long David had been living in Montreal or under what name, but police believe he had established some form of life there, possibly under an alias. On December 6, 1998, David's body was discovered in an underground walkway in downtown Montreal, beneath a railway bridge. The circumstances of his death were immediately suspicious in the sense that he was a wanted fugitive, but police quickly ruled out foul play. His body was found next to a bottle of beer and a container of lighter fluid, suggesting the possibility of substance abuse or self-harm, though toxicology tests were ordered to determine the exact cause of death. The identification process was expedited by the fact that his fingerprints were already in the RCMP database due to his prior criminal record in Toronto. The discovery did not immediately close the book on the case. Montreal police, aware of his history and the possibility that he had continued to offend while in Canada, launched a new investigation to determine whether he had committed additional crimes during his time in Montreal. Authorities announced plans to run DNA tests on his remains and compare them to evidence from unsolved sexual assault cases in the city. At the same time, police made a public appeal for information about David's activities and whereabouts during his time in Montreal. They sought to determine how long he had been in the city, what name or names he had been using, and whether he had any known associates or contacts. The investigation was hampered by the lack of digital records and the transient nature of the population he may have interacted with, but authorities were determined to uncover any additional crimes he may have committed. Despite his connections to Hollywood, David's death elicited little public response from his famous relatives. Warren Beatty reportedly acknowledged the situation privately, but refrained from making public statements, and there were no retrospectives following the death. Ultimately, David's DNA was not linked to any active cases at the time of his discovery. Furthermore, the specific details regarding his autopsy findings were not released to the public. Jason Patrick Callahan, born in 1976 and raised in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, was known by his family as a creative young man with a deep appreciation for music, particularly from the Grateful Dead. In the summer of 1995, at the age of 19, Jason was living with his mother, Elizabeth Parks. That June, he decided to embark on a journey, leaving home to follow the Grateful Dead on their East Coast tour. His mother later recounted that Jason had left with little money and few possessions, intending to travel with friends or hitchhike between concert venues. She believed he would return home after the tour safe and sound as always. The Grateful Dead's 1995 summer tour included stops in Washington, D.C. and Virginia, attracting thousands of fans from across the country. Jason attended at least 2 concerts at Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Stadium in Washington, D.C. on June 24th and 25, 1995. Ticket stubs for these shows were later found among his belongings. The vibrant, transient community of Deadheads often traveled together, sharing rides, food, and accommodations. Jason was known to be outgoing and friendly, easily making connections with other fans on the road. However, the specifics of his movements and companions after leaving Myrtle Beach remain unclear. There is no evidence he maintained regular contact with his family during these final days, which isn't entirely unusual with someone of Jason's age. Then, on June 26, 1995, a tragic accident unfolded on a rural stretch of US Route 58 near Emporia in Greensville County, Virginia. At approximately 1:30 p.m., a 1986 Volkswagen Vanagon, driven by Michael Hager, was traveling westbound when it suddenly veered off the road and collided forcefully with 2 trees close to the intersection with Route 605. The van, which had been following the route of the Grateful Dead's summer tour, was carrying Jason as a passenger. Neither Hager nor Jason was wearing a seatbelt, and the severity of the impact resulted in both men being ejected from the vehicle. The injuries sustained were catastrophic, particularly for Jason, who suffered extensive blunt force trauma to his head and torso, and both men died instantly at the scene. The accident occurred under clear weather conditions on a 2-lane highway bordered by dense greenery. There were no immediate signs of hazardous road conditions or obstructions. Investigators later considered the possibility that Hager, who had been driving for several hours after visiting his father in Williamsburg, may have fallen asleep at the wheel, though toxicology reports would ultimately rule out alcohol or drug involvement as contributing factors. First responders arrived swiftly after the crash. Michael Hager was identified without difficulty thanks to the van's registration and personal documents found on his person. In stark contrast, the passenger, later identified as Jason Callahan, had no identification on him. His body, discovered about 15 feet from the wrecked vehicle, bore severe facial injuries, including multiple lacerations and fractures, which made visual identification extremely challenging. The personal effects found with Jason provided the only immediate clues to his identity. He was wearing a red Grateful Dead tie-dye t-shirt commemorating the band's 30th anniversary, light blue Levi's jeans, black Fila athletic shoes, and a macrame beaded necklace. In his pockets, authorities found a yellow Bic lighter, $1 in quarters, 2 ticket stubs for Grateful Dead concerts, and a handwritten note addressed to Jason from 2 individuals named Caroline O. and Caroline T. The note, written on a scrap of paper, read, "Sorry we had to go, see you around, call me." The phone number, missing an area code, could not be traced to any active line. Authorities also documented amateurish tattoos on Jason's arms, a pierced left ear without an earring, and a scar on his back. The investigation into the passenger's identity began immediately but was fraught with challenges. The extent of Jason's facial trauma required forensic reconstructions rather than traditional photographs. Early sketches by local artists depicted a young Caucasian male with shoulder-length, curly, light brown hair and brown eyes, but these images did not closely resemble Jason's actual appearance, limiting their effectiveness in generating leads. Dental records showed no prior dental work, but all third molars were fully erupted, suggesting he was at least in his late teens. Fingerprints were taken, but matched no entries in national databases. Despite distributing descriptions and reconstructions to law enforcement agencies and within the Grateful Dead community, no one came forward to identify the young man. The investigation into the crash also focused on Michael Hager's background. Hager, a student from South Carolina, had attended the same Grateful Dead concerts as Callahan and had recently visited his father in Williamsburg. It was believed that Hager may have picked up Jason while hitchhiking between Fairfax and Gloucester, Virginia, though this detail could not be confirmed. The note found with Callahan, particularly the reference to Caroline, became a focal point for investigators. The area code of 914 pointed to New York's Westchester County, but follow-up inquiries with individuals individuals named Caroline in the region yielded no results. The ticket stubs were traced to a Pennsylvania-based reseller who, due to the high volume of sales, could not recall specific buyers. In July 1995, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released a bulletin describing the unidentified passenger as a white male, around 5 feet 8 inches tall, weighing 150 to 170 pounds, and estimated to be between 16 and 21 years old. Flyers featuring forensic reconstructions and details of his clothing and belongings were distributed at Grateful Dead concerts and posted in online forums. Despite these efforts, the case quickly stagnated. By 1996, authorities had compared the unidentified man's dental records and physical characteristics against more than 200 missing persons cases, but all were ruled out. The absence of a missing person report proved to be a significant barrier, as Jason's mother, Elizabeth Parks, later explained that she had assumed her son was living a nomadic lifestyle and did not realize he was missing until many years later. For nearly 20 years, the identity of the young man killed in that 1995 Virginia car crash remained a mystery. Despite the efforts of police, the case went cold. Over the years, the case lingered in the background of missing persons forums and cold case websites, but it wasn't until around 2010 that it began to attract widespread attention from a new generation of digital detectives. The breakthrough in the Grateful Doe case was not the result of a single discovery, but rather the culmination of years of incremental progress, amplified by the reach of social media and the techniques of open source intelligence. Platforms like Reddit, Imgur, and Facebook became the primary arenas for discussion and investigation. Users shared facial reconstructions, details about the crash, and theories about the victim's identity. The case was especially popular among true crime enthusiasts and members of the deadhead community who felt a personal connection to the story. A pivotal moment arrived in January 2015 when a Reddit user known as Zombie Gray posted a detailed summary of the case, including images of the facial reconstructions, photos of the victim's belongings, and a call to action for anyone with information. The post included the now famous note addressed to Jason and the ticket stubs from the Grateful Dead concerts. The post quickly went viral, being shared across multiple platforms and reaching a massive audience, including people who had attended the same concerts or lived in the same regions as the unidentified man. The viral spread of the Reddit posts marked a turning point. Armchair detectives began to apply various techniques, combing through public records, old concert photos, missing persons databases, and social media archives. Some users attempted to trace the phone number on the note, while others examined archives of local newspapers and compared the facial reconstructions to yearbook photos and images posted by Grateful Dead fans from the mid-1990s. One of the most significant developments occurred when a former roommate of Jason's recognized the facial reconstruction and details from the viral post. The roommate, who had lived with Jason in Illinois in late 1994 and early 1995, reached out to the moderators of the Grateful Doe subreddit and provided additional information about Jason's background and habits. He described Jason as a passionate Grateful Dead fan who had worked at a McDonald's and left in early 1995 to follow the band on tour. The roommate also shared photographs of Jason which bore a striking resemblance to the reconstructions and the clothing described in the crash report. Parallel to the activity on Reddit, a dedicated Facebook group called Who Was Grateful Doe became a hub for crowdsourced investigation. Members of the group meticulously compared details from the case with missing persons reports and reached out to people who might have known Jason. The group's collaborative efforts helped to maintain momentum and ensure that new information was quickly disseminated and discussed. In January 2015, the viral posts and Facebook discussions reached Jason Callahan's family. His mother and his half-sister saw the reconstructions and recognized the details as matching Jason, whom they had last seen in June 1995 when he left home in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina to follow the Grateful Dead. Prompted by the online revelations, Jason's mother filed a missing person report with the Myrtle Beach Police Department in January 2015. Law enforcement then coordinated with the Virginia Medical Examiner's Office and the National Missing and Unidentified Person System to obtain DNA samples from Jason's family. Initial tests were inconclusive, but further analysis ultimately confirmed that the unidentified man was indeed Jason Callahan. The official announcement was made in December 2015, bringing closure to a case that had haunted investigators and online communities for 2 decades. The news was met with a mixture of relief and sorrow as family members expressed gratitude for the efforts of the internet sleuths who had made the identification possible. Shannon Michelson, Jason's half-sister, posted a heartfelt message on the Facebook group, thanking everyone who had contributed to the search and explaining how the online community had helped her reconnect with her brother's story after so many years.